Well, it's 5 o'clock. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good, good. Yeah, it looked good on this end. And did you all get my message about being all virtual today?
Yes, we got it.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I was out earlier and it didn't look good. And when the sun goes down, I'm sure a lot of this stuff will refreeze. So we're staying safe today. And so, um, what I'd like to do today is talk to you about quiz one. Uh, I graded them. I graded them kind of high, and I made a few comments, but there were a few things that I wanted to share with you because I think what I have to share will be valuable. And so this is the review. Okay, I'll start with the bad stuff, the issues, problem areas. First of all, organization. And some of you just kind of started out writing and then kind of halfway down through the paragraph tell me what the title is, and maybe in the next paragraph tell me who the artist was, and maybe as the last sentence, this was done in 1452 or something. So instead of taking that identifying information and spreading it through your essay, put it all together in a concise package. And that's what I said. Don't disclose the information over the course of your answer. And I used the word answer, but that'll hold true for uh, the papers and your video presentation. You need to come out and put all of that information up front. And secondly, be clear about the information. The titles like Last Supper, David, etc., were titles and subject matter for many works by many artists. And I can think of 3 Davids right off the top of my head by Donatello, Del Verrocchio, and Michelangelo. And so that's part of bullet point 1, the organization. That's why you put it in kind of a tight package. Spelling and grammar are important. Most of the answers I had were really pretty good. But as this bottom bullet point says, altar and altar are 2 different things. Altar is an area of the church where the Mass is performed or where the Holy Eucharist is kept, the altar. Alter the other way with the E means you change something. Change your hemline. Alter your clothing so your suit fits better. Alter means change. And so that is there were a lot of instances like that in this in your answers. And so your spell check won't catch that. Both of those words are spelled properly, but bottom line is one is the right word, the other is not. Some of you did not list your sources. That's important, and that's going to be important. It's going to be important throughout. But I got to say this, the sources I saw that you listed were largely pretty good sources. I saw things like Encyclopedia Britannica, Khan Academy, various museum websites, all good. And so I wasn't finding like how Leonardo was a space alien or something. Bottom line is that you guys were doing pretty well on that, but some of you did not list your sources, and that was not good. The other bullet point, media is not the same as technique. And it's and they're not really interchangeable. Media is what's listed on the placard, on the information. When you see your illustration in the book, it has title, artist, date. Usually, oftentimes the artist is top, but uh, date, media, country of origin. Those are on the placards when you go to the museum. When you go to a museum, you see a little placard right next to the work, has the same information, typically in the same order. There may be a little bit more put on that. After the country of origin, you might find something like gift of the May Family Foundation or something. Bottom line is that is that uh, when they do this media, it is what it's made out of. It's not really the technique. Technique is a little more granular. Technique is a little bit more uh, technical. Oh wow! Did I did I hit upon something? Technical technique? Yeah, I think so. Technique is how the media is used, and sometimes that will go after the media is like made out of steel, but you might say welded steel ground with a circular sander or something. But the media is what it's made out of. The technique is how it's done. So don't call oil paint a technique. Don't call bronze a technique or marble a technique. Now, marble could be done in a variety of techniques. It could be done with power tools, it could be done by hand sanding, it could be done with chisels, it could be done a lot of different ways. Those are techniques. The media would be marble. And sometimes the techniques, and especially what we've studied so far, the techniques are kind of still a little unknown because they were, as you might call, trade secrets. And so sometimes conservators, art historians, people working in conservation, they reverse engineer the technique. For example, talking about the Last Supper here, the one by Leonardo da Vinci, that was an experimental technique where he tried to use tempera, oil, and plaster all together. And it didn't last. It deteriorated over time, and so they had to restore it. And he restored it by reverse engineering. But those are the kinds of things I want you to remember for the next time I ask you to write about something. Uh, so I made a list of some of the things of the ones that you liked. Uh, and here is the list. And one thing I noticed here was that all of this was in the first few chapters of volume two. So we don't go past the high Renaissance and we go back to the early Renaissance. And so, can I ask you guys a question? Were these your favorites, or were these the ones that you knew something about, or did you want to wait until we got to more newer works before you start having an opinion about newer works, or what? You don't have to answer that right now, but it's also occurred to me that what we have studied heretofore from the beginning until today, and it'll keep going, this work really kind of sets the standard for what we think of as good art. It it is foundational. And we're starting to see now, after the high Renaissance, that artists are starting to do other things. I showed you the later Michelangelo Pietà, which was not as anatomically correct or as polished as the earlier Pietà. We see a lot of things starting to happen. We see Mannerism emerge, which is really about distortion for purposes of telling the story or evoking evoking an emotion from the viewer. And so anyway, and I have twos by these because there were two of you that listed that. And so what you liked, skill and religious beliefs. You like the subject matter, you like the stories. Some of you talked about formal issues, how well it was done, the color, the drawing proportions, and stuff like that. And a couple of you talked about owning a copy of the work. And if I am correct in this, I'm thinking that Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper was one of those, and maybe anyway, if you like it enough to buy it, I'm sure you like it. And so here I have a good example. And so I typically do this. I take the name uh, off of an entry, and I I bring it in and show you what what's expected. And so, good example. I decided to choose The Creation of Adam by Michelangelo. I chose this painting because I really like the artist Michelangelo. And then a little bit of humor. Not only is he the best Ninja Turtle, but he is also just an interesting person. And I can deal with a little bit of humor. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. A lot of people are not so and don't really have a sense of humor, but it's okay. Just don't overdo it. It's just interesting to think that his most famous work is one that he didn't even want to do. And I like the tells me how to read that. The entirety of the Sistine Chapel had been hell on Michelangelo to the point where he wrote poems about the pain he suffered from laying on his back and paint falling on his face. And while he was a devout Christian, and even the best entries have a spelling error, it was the kind that spell checked, I corrected it. Devout Christian. See, this is that bullet point applies to almost everybody. Like most Italians at the time, Michelangelo did so much more non-religious work. His sculptures weren't often religious. He also made poems about and architecture that weren't tied to Christianity. The reason for his religious work was because he was Pope Julius's favorite artist. He would constantly commission Michelangelo and was the one to ask him to paint the Sistine Chapel, which included the creation of Adam. And so I don't have all of the information, but I'm getting it. The Pope had given Michelangelo a medium he was unfamiliar with because Dante Bramante, a rival architect, resented Michelangelo. He convinced the Pope to hire Michelangelo to paint the ceiling in hopes that he would fail miserably. The original commission, and I want to hold it right there, and we saw a lot of Michelangelo's um, architecture too. The original commission was much less complicated. Only the 12 apostles. Michelangelo insisted on free reign, and that's correct. I loved it. So he could make a more complex piece. He didn't just want to succeed, he wanted to excel simply out of spite. It took him 4 years to complete the paintings due to being interrupted with other commissions and his work on the Pope's tomb. There are a lot of theories on what the symbolism of the creation of Adam is, aside from the religious aspect. The one I personally believe is that Michelangelo painted the entirety of the chapel with the concept of human anatomy. I like that. If you look, you can see the paintings represent the human body spread out. The creation of Adam is also thought of as a brain of sorts. And I talked to you guys about that. Um, Michelangelo was an amazing sculptor due to his excelling in anatomy. So I truly think that he used his knowledge of anatomy to create his paintings. I think that's very true. My background, how I was trained, what I was educated in, is studio painting. And kind of connected to that is drawing. And in fact, a lot of schools connect the two of them. You major in painting and drawing. But one thing that I've always known is that sculptors were almost always the best at drawing, which is amazing, except when you think about how sculptors have the capacity to think three-dimensionally. So, not looking at things as flat, but understanding space and mass and form is really very, very helpful in doing two-dimensional work, such as painting. God's portrayal in the creation of Adam is more than just looking like a brain. It is anatomically correct. The fact that there are so many different ways to look at the creation of Adam and the rest of the Sistine Chapel make it such a fascinating work of art. And there you go. There's the sources. And so, any questions about that? No questions. Good. And you see, there were some things there too about how the author of this kind of put the information about the title, the author, the media, or the artist, the media, and the location, kind of spread it out. And that's what I was talking about with the organization. Put that stuff up first and then get into the substance of your painting, of your blah, blah, of your essay. So, got stuff to talk about. Chapter 23. And this is the rest of High Renaissance and Mannerism. So a lot, really, in a lot of ways, the same thing's happening in Italy. We're starting to happen all over the rest of Europe. There's something here I want to bring your attention to on this map, and that is Portugal. 16th century, Portugal has a navy and they have colonies. The country of Brazil was a Portuguese colony. This tiny little country on the Iberian Peninsula had a navy and they colonized. Then they colonized Angola in Africa, Macau in China. And so, anyway, the Portuguese were all over the world. Spain, we know about Spain. Christopher Columbus. And Spain colonized the other half of South America. Actually, the Pope divided the Americas up between Portugal and Spain because there was this kind of idea that they were spreading Christianity to all of these native people. Bottom line, cut the line, everything to the east was Portuguese, such as Brazil. Everything to the west, like Chile and um, Mexico and so on, and the Caribbean, Spain. And so, anyway, then we got France also colonizing North America and other places. We got England, we know that in the 16th century. They're not quite over to America until the early 17th century. But these countries are recognizable with these same borders, basically. And then we get to Italy and we see Kingdom of Naples, Republic of Venice, Papal States, Grand Duchy of Tuscany, Lombardy, excuse me. And all of this called the Holy Roman Empire. So the western part of Europe was organized into countries that are basically still recognizable today. And the Central European countries were still basically under the Pope, Holy Roman Empire. And so they were basically not even quite countries. And what I was talking about the statue of David being the symbol for Florence because they were defending themselves from all of these other city states. This is why. And it stayed like this. And that's why Germany, Austria, Italy, they didn't really get into colonizing the rest of the world until a few centuries later. But at this time, we got the Spanish. They're setting up shop all over the world. So is Portugal. So is France. And so Quentin Massys, the money changer. And so we take a look at this. This is really basically what we were seeing with Van Eyck, Jan Van Eyck, Northern Renaissance, same kind of depiction of people. We see a lot of the same detail, especially the crystal here. We see the convex mirror, which is always something that they like to play around with. Um, and this is almost 100 years after Van Eyck. And the idea of reading illustrated manuscripts. And so the money changer and his wife, noticeably, and this is one of the things I liked about the essay I read you about Michelangelo, and Michelangelo's, the bulk of his work was not religious. We start to see that really happening over the rest of Europe too. We saw the Arnolfini marriage by Van Eyck, not religious. And we see this merchant class emerge, and they are prosperous enough to have their portraits painted. And so I put this in here as a starred work. It's the Eisenheim altarpiece by Matthias Grunwald, and it's in Eisenheim, uh, France. And I'll show you something here too. Saw this earlier. Eisenheim is here. It was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and actually France's borders kind of this area right here. That's been fought over for centuries between Germany and France. That's why you get in France a number of cities that have German names because it's been fought over. Anyway, here we go. The Eisenheim altarpiece, one of the great examples of high Renaissance in Northern Europe. And so this is uh, an altarpiece that folds out like in three different ways. And this is closed, and this is all the way open. But I have some other pictures to show you of the second way it's portrayed. You can see there's a line right through here. Let's take a closer look, though. Crucifixion. Look at this. The agony. We think this was probably the Magdalene, and then this figure in the white was the mother Mary, likely St. John the Apostle. And this could be, and doesn't quite fit the timeline, John the Baptist, who told by looking at scripture that a Messiah was coming. Another little bit of symbolism, Christ as the Lamb of God. If you do Catholic Mass, um, Lutheran Mass, a lot of religions refer to Jesus as the Lamb of God. We have the chalice here, but what we have here is, to me, the most important part of this work. Is this idealized, or is this gruesome? Is this the kind of crucifixion that would cause you to have nightmares? What do you think?
I don't think it's quite as gruesome as it could be.
Yeah,
I think it looks a little more on the idealized side, I would probably say.
yeah, Robin, I like that answer. And I think that, this is and you're spot on. One of the things about gruesome and and horrific, I think, has as much to do with the age in which we live in. You know, uh, because we see things like all the time that are much more gruesome, especially in film. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And so for the time, this was extremely gruesome and unusual because the idea of having Christ not totally idealized was kind of a thing. But you're right, our sensibilities have changed. Our sensibilities about being gruesome or scary have changed a lot. And I'm old, and I can tell you, back in what, 1959, 1960, long time ago, when I was a little kid, uh, Alfred Hitchcock made the scariest movies that for their time. And the movie Psycho, and I don't know if you guys seen this, but it's been remade and stuff, and it's with Anthony Perkins and the Bates Motel, and this woman in the early part of the film in the shower stabbed to death. You don't see a knife so much, you see a hand, and you see blood going down the drain because she's in the shower, and you see the blood, but you don't see the stab wounds. You don't see all of the other horror of being stabbed to death with a big knife. Now, today, you would. You'd see the gut spill out. You would see all kinds of things. So our sensibilities have changed, and I love that answer, Robin, because you're right. But for the time, this was like really gruesome. And the idea of Christ and suffering pain, and the idea that he is depicting here is that Christ not only died for us, he suffered, died, and was buried. It's interesting. These are altar pieces, and I keep reciting parts of the Catholic Mass, but that's the way it was. And so this is the center panel of the altarpiece closed. And then when you open up that part, you get, and these aren't really good pictures, but you can open this up and see the ascension of Christ. And there he is. He's going into heaven. Here are the soldiers by the tomb. Uh, Christ died and was buried. He ascended into heaven. There it is. And this, we've seen this before too, and this is kind of really pretty typical. The Annunciation, Angel Gabriel, you're going to have a son, and he will be the Messiah. And the book where the prophecies are. And so finally, when this altarpiece is fully opened, this is, or excuse me, it's fully closed. Wait, I get this all mixed up because let me get it. Yeah, the top, this is closed, bottom open. That's what I thought. I want to make sure I'm not telling you the wrong thing. And this is all the way open with these panels coming up over here and over there. And so anyway, wood carving. And so that is, and one of you wrote about an altarpiece made through carved wood. That was still in art. And for a lot of this work, the frame and the carving was seen and is beginning to be rediscovered as being as important as the paintings. And so here we have, it's elaborate, it's artful, gold leaf, everything. And the guy I wanted to get to, two people I want to make sure we get to see today. This is one of them, Albrecht Dürer. The other one is El Greco from Spain. Albrecht Dürer, self-portrait 1500. Dürer is considered to be one of the greatest draftsmen of history, of Western art history. And I was talking to you just a moment ago, and this is probably still on my mind, the idea of drawing being so aligned, so interconnected with painting. That was this guy. He could draw and paint. And the detail, it's just right out of continuation of all of the things that were done in the Northern European Renaissance. And it's been said that Dürer had quite an ego, and this self-portrait of him is deliberately somewhat Christ-like. And one thing that he always did, and this is something we haven't seen before, where I had my cursor, A.D., Albrecht Dürer. You see this on almost everything he did, his signature. And he's got his name up here and when he painted it. And so Albrecht Dürer, in a lot of text, you'll find him listed right there with Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Albrecht Dürer as being the fourth Ninja Turtle, if you will. And so the more he has been uncovered, the more he's appreciated. And let me show you why. He was in some respects a lot like Leonardo da Vinci. And he was very interested in nature and depicted nature. This is a watercolor It's titled A Great Piece of Turf. And so we have a lot of these botanical watercolors and drawings from Albrecht Dürer. And oftentimes we are finding plants that no longer exist. And so the botanists who kind of do microbotany and they find ancient pollens and things, they can get an idea of what kind of foliage existed 500 years ago. And so Durer's work is so exact, you can use this as a source in your scientific research. And he's amazing and it's impeccable. And another thing he did a lot of was printmaking. And for a long time, he was really kind of considered a printmaker, first and foremost. And we had the invention of the printing press. And Dürer was one who understood that if you made prints, in this case, an engraving, that is where you etch steel, actually scratch into the surface of a steel plate and ink it up, wipe it, run it through. You can create multiples, and if it's good steel and your lines are clean, you can get a whole bunch of pieces, a whole bunch of prints from one plate. And so Adam and Eve, biblical, and here it is, the snake, the forbidden fruit, and that was always kind of a big theme. A little bit of modesty here with the leaves over the genitalia, and the Garden of Eden with all of the animals and the birds. And little goat up there on the mountain. And I want you to see this. There's a little plaque that comes out of nowhere. Albrecht Dürer. Wow. Like I say, we see him sign his work or put his identification on it, and that was really a new thing. We have a lot of work that we know who did it, and before that, we have a lot of work that we have no idea who did it. But Dürer was quite open with signing and identifying his work as his. And so, night, death, and the devil. And so, I showed you Bronzino's Cupid, Folly, and Love, or anyway, Mannerism in Italy, where the allegories start to come back. And so the pictures tell stories, the idea of a night and death being right there, traveling along with him. Right, this guy is right at death's door. And the skull, the ever faithful dog, the goat, so on. Lots of symbolism. And you see, there's death's horse. You see, death is waiting to reap this guy, the devil. And so, bottom line, this is right here, Albrecht Dürer, 1513. And you can see quite an accomplishment, quite an accomplished printmaker. Melancholia, 1514. There's my signature right down here. More symbolism and this shape here, which is really kind of cool because it shows you that he does quite understand multiple point perspective. And you see this hammer going this way, and you see can imagine the horizon line. There's the horizon. And so these lines lead to the vanishing point. But if something is adjusted, not parallel. So anyway, we know that Durr understands a lot of those accomplishments, if not all of the accomplishments of the Italian Renaissance. He's the guy that understands the Northern Renaissance and the use of oil painting and the idea of being able to reproduce or produce images of fur and texture and hair and stuff like that. I would go back on that because this is really quite important. This one, oh, this one here. Look at that. It's almost like he painted every strand of hair individually. Look at the fur on that coat. And I found this, and I thought it was really very interesting. It's a drawing. It's not an engraving. It's pencil on paper. And the reason what took me by surprise is that it's a drawing of an African man. And I thought that was really pretty cool. And if you take a look at this, 1508, and you take a look at this, there is his signature. But I liked it as evidence that Africans, and you don't find a lot of evidence that Africans were in and about in Europe, but they were. And this is pretty much predates the slave trade in Africa. The slave trade had begun and it reached America's shores in 1619. But at any rate, Africans were in and among Europeans. And I loved it for that reason. 1506, Albrecht Dürer. Look at this. It's a drawing. It's a drawing with what appears to be like white conte on a gray piece of paper, using the white for highlights and some of the hatching and cross hatching. This is groundbreaking. This is drawing. This is extremely good drawing. This is right there with all of the stuff that Leonardo did. And in some ways, it's scientific. It's an anatomical study, and it's also a work of art. And he did a lot of other things too. I showed you the botanical stuff. And we find that he did a lot of animal studies, fauna, if you will. And so what we find in his work, oftentimes we don't know if these are animals that are extinct or if he was creating them based on, like I was saying, by the 1520s, we got a lot of Western Europeans sailing off to Africa, to South America, to North America, to Asia, and bringing back descriptions of the strange, to them strange, animals that they were finding. So sometimes we don't know if it's a description or something he observed. Probably the rabbit observed, probably this walrus, probably described. But it's, again, because it's accurate to what was described. We can use this as part of evidence in search of extinct animals as well as plants. Uh, there's a rhinoceros and it's got all of the plates. This is probably from a description of a rhinoceros because in some respects it looks the same, but if you're talking about the armor a rhinoceros has, I don't know. But at any rate, he's a scientist. He's a naturalist. He's he's a he draws, he paints, he does watercolors, and he makes prints. And I put this one in here too. And it's not in the book, but I thought this was interesting because it answered a question that I had. This is the study, the study as in room, of Saint Jerome. And as I was looking through a lot of stuff, especially Northern Renaissance stuff, Saint Jerome comes up all of the time, obviously here. And so what I found out is that Saint Jerome was kind of considered a patron saint of these kinds of artist scholars that we see in Northern Europe. And you see St. Jerome, and he is there reading and studying, and he's got his halo, and he's got the lion and the lamb sleeping together, and it's got the skull and blah blah blah. But St. Jerome, to get down to it, was an early Christian scholar. He lived in the Middle East in the fourth century, and he was very instrumental in um, putting together some of the early Bibles from Latin text and from old ancient Greek text. And so he was kind of a reclusive, and he was a monk, and he was a scholar. And a lot of the roads, if you trace Christianity back to its origin, a lot of those paths lead right through St. Jerome. And so they idolized him. They liked being Christian, they liked being scholarly, and they liked being um, worldly. And so more Albrecht Dürer, Four Apostles from City Hall in Nuremberg, Germany. And we see this too. This is 1526. Remember what I called this dark background, this kind of modeling to create the illusion of deep space? Chiaroscuro or tenebrism. Chiaroscuro means that there's strong light coming from the front, but there's a dark background to create the illusion of depth. And you see this figure here is very, it's almost hard to discern where he's at, except that we see the strong light hitting his face. But his hair and his shirt and his body blend right into that dark background. So, anyway, we see this throughout Albrecht Dürer's career. He is doing many of the same things his Italian counterparts are doing. And so, printing is really kind of a big thing in Northern European art. And so, we start to see these things, these allegories, the law, the gospel, the Ten Commandments, there's all kinds of things uh, going on. The crucifixion, the Annunciation, you know. Um, but this is Lucas Cranach, the elder, and the judgment of Paris. Now, this comes out of ancient Greek mythology. And so they're kind of still doing some of that ancestor worship, that idea of looking to the classical period for inspiration, and that's happening too. And chiaroscuro, woodcut. There's that word, there it is. And that means this dark background here. And it appears as though this was printed at least a couple of times. One with the black ink, part of it with the brown ink, and perhaps this is not white ink, but maybe the color of the paper or not. But multiple runs of woodcut. Allegories, again, 3 ages of woman and death. So here's the 3 ages: the baby woman, woman in her prime, of course, looking in a mirror and kind of admiring herself. And then the old woman, and there's death. And he's got the hourglass, which was how you kept time during those days. And so the sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. Albrecht Outdoor, Battle of Issus, heroic painting. Um, Hans Holbein, Northern Renaissance painter, and he's kind of a interesting study here because he comes in really in the mid-century, mid-16th century, and this is the French ambassadors, and I put a star by this one too because he is really pretty important. And you can see a lot of the trappings, a lot of the stylistic conventions of Northern Renaissance painting. The detail on the floor, the idea of all, or the painting of all of this fur, silk, so on. The French ambassadors. And this is something that an ambassador would carry. And it would have some, and as well as the medallion, it would identify them as ambassadors from France or to France. And so this would be given to them by the king so that not just anybody could show up at another king's palace and say they were from England or France or whatever. And so it's oil and tempera on wood, tempera being kind of what the Italians were so into. But you can see, same detail, just everything. All of this stuff here on the table is a metaphor. It has, you have the lute, music book, uh, a globe there, a globe here, all of this stuff meant to show that they were men of culture and they were learned. And this was like, in a lot of ways, like all of the scientific stuff of the era. And so we don't know exactly why these was painted. We didn't know if this was taken off the frame and sent to the King of England to say, if you see these guys, he is our ambassador. These are our ambassadors, or whatever. We don't really know so much about that, but there's something else that's even kind of a bigger mystery, and that's this thing here. And the book will tell you, and I'll tell you, that this is an image that, if you look at it from sideways, if you were to stand like right up next to this and look down from here to there, you will see that this is a skull. It's called an anamorphic image, and it is the kind of image that you have to sort of turn the picture plane to be able to see it. And we don't really know. We think it may be some secret code. Could be that it is a symbol that Hans Holbein devised, and his name actually means hollow bone. So who knows? But at any rate, this is what they call an anamorphic image. And that becomes very popular too. I'm going to kind of go back a little bit on that. And so with stuff like this, where there would be all of these stories and allegories and different kinds of messages going on, one of the things that happens in this kind of art is that they turn to anamorphic imagery. And so you might have an image that, looking at it, might look like a landscape or something benign, but then you turn it and look at it from the side and you see portraits um, of like kings or whatever. So anyway, they got really very clever in this period. Uh, this is Hans Holbein again, painted the portrait of Henry VIII. In fact, Holbein was the court painter for Henry VIII. This is extremely famous. Uh, and so, this, Hieronymus Bosch, one of the things that happens in this era is that in a lot of cases we go backwards. And all of those things that we learned about naturalism, about uh, about anatomy, about all of this stuff, kind of goes away. In fact, this looks like pre-Renaissance painting. And it's called the Garden of Earthly Delights, and it is a triptych. It is 3 panels. And this being the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and God, Christ. God and Christ being synonymous here. And we know this is from the book of Genesis. We see this, and there's all kinds of things happening, all kinds of strange activity. And it's all about the joys of the world and things and prosperity. And hey, look here, we got more African people in here. Uh, and then we got this panel here, which is titled Hell. And so we go from the creation or the Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis, the creation of man, to hell, and then everything in between. And so Hieronymus Bosch, I want to show you. Oh, I didn't get. I'll just have to describe this. I thought I might have had another illustration there about this hell. It's really very bizarre. If you're interested, it's online, and it shows a lot of debauchery. It's kind of about a lot of sins and things, and you see up here is hell and the fire and brimstone and things. And these things here, like this guy crucified on a harp, and that was kind of the beginnings of how music could be the work of the devil and stuff like that. But I want to show you where this is at. This is at the Prado in Madrid, Spain. And this served as a model, inspiration for the 20th century artist Salvador Dali. In fact, he often talked about how he got his imagery and his way of painting from this exact work. And if you take a look at it, you'll see a lot of similarities between this and surrealism. And as I'm looking at my watch, I'm kind of thinking it's time to wrap it up. Any questions?
Where is this painting like today?
In Madrid, Spain, at the Prado Museum.
Oh, okay.
And the Prado is like the national museum of Spanish art. And there's a lot of famous works there too by some of the people we'll look at, including Picasso's Guernica and so on. But yeah, that's where it's at. And again, Bosch is kind of an outlier. He's not doing what everybody else is doing. He's doing there. A lot of people describe him as the last of the medieval artists because of the way he doesn't particularly care about anatomy and perspective and all of that stuff that the other artists have been working on for biggest part of a century and a half. And so we'll pick it up on Wednesday. And have a good weekend. Be safe. And have fun. See you later.
Bye. Thank you.